Hello my friends, by the time I'm recording this video, Zelensky is flying to the United States of America. Tomorrow there's going to be the meeting between him and a president of the United States of America, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is, I guess, too much optimistic about the possible deal between somehow the United States of America and Ukraine. By the time there is an actual conflict, hot one, war literally ongoing between Ukraine and Russia, but United States and Ukraine are agreeing on some of the points of the peace plan. And yes, there are also some of the voices coming from Russia that we are at the final stage of this war, that soon it's going to be at least a ceasefire. But mainly Russia rejects all of those 20 points, which were agreed, some say by 90, some say by 95%, between American side and Ukrainian one. But Russia continued to tell about 28 or 27-point peace plan that was originally proposed by Dmitriev to Vitkov, who stated that, oh, this is the Trump's peace plan, let's follow it, let's push Ukraine for capitulation. And it seems like they still continue to push Ukraine to give up territories of Donbass, at least voluntarily, to Russia. Now Vitkov says about some sort of the free economy zone. Well, there are just few of the details of that proposal. It seems like this zone should belong to no one and it should be demilitarized, free of taxes and some bullshit like that. But we understand that Russia wants to get those territories. Plus, just yesterday, the Deputy Minister of the Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Ryabkov, stated to one of the interviews to the Russian propaganda media that Russia is still oriented to get Donbass in one or other way. Well, in general, they're saying about the achieving of the goals of the special military operation. We see that Russia now is not that effective. In some of the points they are successful, like for example they have the partial success in Gulaipole by reaching the central part of that settlement. Also they occupied recently Siversk, but there are multiple of the fuck-ups of Russia too, as they've lost the Kupiansk city completely. By the time they continue to tell that no, we liberated Kupiansk, but it's complete nonsense that was repeated multiple of the times by Russian military officials, Putin himself, but it doesn't fit reality. We understand it by 100%. Sadly, but Donald Trump doesn't understand that, so there is hope for tomorrow that Zelensky will tell and show the real cards of Ukraine, because Ukraine really has those cards, and the recent counteroffensive in Kupiansk really shows that. But so far, the White House really thinks that Russia has this huge advantage over Ukraine, and they're not using the full potential. However, me and you, we monitor what is happening on the front lines. If Russia uses even horses massively already, we see those videos, or they use even their convoy attacks in the most stupid way possible, attacking the most defended areas of the front lines with heaviest losses and without reaching even smaller goals, it means that Russia doesn't have this huge advantage as Putin would like to proclaim. So the diplomatic task for tomorrow for Ukraine is to convince Americans that no, it's not what Putin is saying to you what is happening in reality. You need to exit this bubble, Putin's disinformation, or disinformation that is coming from Vitkov, because he is brainwashed by Russia completely, by Dmitriev, and Kushner is also brainwashed. The real thing is that the next year is go-no-go for the Russian military campaign in Ukraine, because with the current losses, they will have to announce new mobilization for Russian men, taking 400,000 as they plan. Now they don't have volunteers, they don't have enough meat for those mid-wave attacks. At the current scale, they continue to lose their forces in Ukraine. They simply cannot cover those losses, and I'm starting to tell about it once again because I obtained the information about those losses. It's not just those official figures, no, but now Russia loses 8 times as average more personnel compared to Ukrainian side, 8 times more. So I hope for the positive outcome of tomorrow's meeting. At the same time, I see the increasement of this pressure on Ukraine and on Zelensky personally. Donald Trump this month said about possible elections in Ukraine. He stated, oh, they need to have elections, Zelensky should conduct elections. But this question is very sensitive for Ukrainian society. And before the last year, I thought that Ukraine should have elections, but now I'm totally against those. I understand that Zelensky's friends are involved in those corruption schemes, many of those, and even today, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, they start to investigate some sort of the bribes among members of parliaments, and one of those involved is long-term friend of President Zelensky, and he went to politics together with Zelensky, and he became the member of parliament of Zelensky's party. Again, there could be corruption because members of parliament, they were bribed for voting for one or other initiative. We understand that it's very bad. So that guy, and not only they're under suspicion of being involved in those corrupt schemes, but still, I mean, with Zelensky, he's not ideal. Yes, I don't like really Zelensky. I didn't vote for him. I don't like Poroshenko either, so do not accuse me of being Poroshenko bot or something. No, I don't like those presidents at all, together with the current one. But I understand that he does something outside Ukraine. I mean, with the foreign help, Zelensky does a fantastic job. For him personally, I cannot forgive what happened at the beginning of the war. Then Ukraine wasn't really preparing for this full-scale aggression, and it's because Ukrainian army wasn't that ready. Ukraine lost all of the southern territories. Some of the ways from Crimea were demined. Not all of them, but there was the demining. It was already proved. There were lots of the spies in Ukrainian internal services, in Ukrainian military, organized also by those people who are affiliated with Zelensky, were Zelensky's friends before, and they let it happen. So Zelensky really has this negative factor of appointing his friends to very important positions. It's called a negative selection, and after it, Ukrainian people, they suffer together with Ukraine. But this video is not about Zelensky. Here I want to say about elections, yeah? Even though I don't like Zelensky really, like not by 100%, I hate him or something, no. I think that now he should be a president still, because elections may ruin absolutely everything. You see, elections, what happened in the United States by the time of the elections? Every sort of election, it's like internal revolution of the country. It doesn't necessarily mean the government change, but it increases the internal instability, internal clashes, and the national division. Politicians from different parties, they start to fight for power, and they accuse each other, making up sometimes even some of the stories. And now it's not okay, because Zelensky is not just the president, but he is the chief commander actually of Ukrainian army by the time there is a full-scale war with Russia. So undermining Zelensky's personality, we also undermine Ukrainian army as it is. Yeah, sometimes I criticize Zelensky, as I did even in this video, but in this competition between politicians, they may use large resources to make it absurd, terrible, and it will also undermine the capabilities of Ukrainian army. It will create this internal confrontation within Ukrainian society, and that is what Russia really wants. That is why they are not against elections, but at the same time Russia wants to use those elections in their favor. Like, for example, Putin already said, oh, there are 10 million Ukrainians living on the Russian territory. De facto, it's not even close like that. And today in his short interview, President Zelensky already stated that Putin, by saying so, wants to put the puppet government in Ukraine. He wants to make Ukrainian elections not illegitimate. And I agree here 100%. Plus, we know that the real illegitimate elections are happening in Russia. Then Putin gets elected every time. He changed the constitution for it. They just write those percentage for him, and they put him in power again and again. And just imagine what might happen if they start elections or conduct those for some other country as Ukraine. It is no doubt that they will put just their own number, their own candidate even, maybe. And it is already understandable that Putin would never ever agree on elections results if there will be no 10 million, some of the Russians voting for Ukrainian future president. So even if Ukraine conducts those elections right now without voting on Russian territory, Russia would not recognize a new president. They would say again it's the military coup that was done in 2014. They say the same stuff again and again. But back then, you know, then there were elections in Ukraine after 2014. I voted, by the time for Poroshenko. Putin actually recognized him. There were several of the meetings between those politicians, phone calls, and the same was for Zelensky. Then there were elections in Ukraine. Zelensky won by the huge margin. 73% of the people voted for him. That is what definitely calls the landslide victory, as Donald Trump likes to say. And later on, Zelensky met with Putin at least once. Plus, there were numerous of the calls, but then Putin understood that Ukrainian president is not his puppet. He is a Ukrainian president first of all, and he cannot force him to give up Ukraine just like that. He lost the interest. For him, Zelensky was the same as Poroshenko. He cancelled all of the communications with Poroshenko for 2 years, I think, before Zelensky came to power. There was no any communication between the Ukrainian and Russian president. With Zelensky, it happened the same. So any sort of the president is not okay for Putin. I mean, real Ukrainian president. He only wants to put puppet government in Ukraine to rule Ukraine as he rules Belarus, for example. But first of all, Putin wants to occupy lots of the Ukrainian territories, maybe up to the Dnipro River, maybe together with Kiev, because he says that Kiev is the original Russian city and Ukraine is the fake country and it was created by Lenin. It's all understandable. We all heard it from every sort of the Putin speech. But now I see that Zelensky is in this game. He said to Donald Trump, okay, we're going to conduct elections, but we need some sort of the security for this time period, at least 60 days. We need ceasefire. But according to Ukrainian constitution, there should be the drop of the martial law for elections and referendums to make those a legitimate ones. Physically, you can do it. Yeah, it's hard to conduct. I don't know how our soldiers who spend many months sometimes on positions, how could they potentially vote in those elections. It was possible that there was just limited fighting in Ukraine before 2022. Definitely it was possible, but now how people may vote. And all of the people in Ukraine, each one should have this opportunity to vote. Otherwise, what's the sense of the elections? They could be illegitimate if some of the persons, they cannot vote, because they cannot reach those points where they can vote. Yeah, sometimes I heard also from our government that maybe we're going to organize it through online voting, but not everyone has smartphones. Again, not everyone has internet. There are blackouts. And today there was, by the way, the strike in Kiev and nearby settlement cities. We're going to speak about it also in this video. So online voting, it's a very tricky thing, because there is always this factor of the breach of the system. Yes, the cybersecurity. As with the air defense, you cannot guarantee 100% security of any sort of the online system, especially nowadays. Then Russia has all of those hackers, and they'll try to hack elections if they're going to be online. Plus, the other factor is the legitimacy of those elections. Ukraine has never ever conducted online elections. Maybe just people voted for Eurovision Song Contest online. That's it. But the important elections where you again elect a chief commander of Ukraine, of Ukrainian army actually, it's like that. Those, I think, should not be conducted online. And our allies, whoever will be elected, maybe after Donald Trump or maybe in other country, Western European country, they may just say, oh, those were just online elections, we think about legitimacy of Zelensky personally if he wins those. So elections online, they create this field of uncertainty and the place for speculations about the legitimacy of the elected persons. And for Ukraine, it's the crucial thing. And for Ukrainian people themselves to believe in the real fair result of those elections. Because if they do not believe, it would create again the crisis, internal division, potential confrontation, and that is the least possible scenario which Ukraine wants right now. Also, voting online, you have some sort of the less load of responsibility than to go somewhere, fill the form, take proper candidate or improper candidate, and vote physically. It's always better for citizens to understand, okay, I voted, not just open smartphone application and stick over there and continue normal business. I think there should be this physical action, which is now unfortunately impossible in Ukraine because Russia strikes, as I told you, Kiev today. They really show that they don't want to reach any sort of the peace. They want to continue to terrorize Ukrainians. They want Ukrainians to spend this winter in cold apartments without any sort of the power. Well, I understand that Russia is doing it, but I also understand that these tactics, it will not work. They want to force Ukrainians to press their own government for capitulation. That is what Russia wants, really. But it never ever worked in human history. Even the Nazis bombed UK, London, with aviation strikes, with F-1, F-2 missiles. People became more consolidated in United Kingdom, and vice versa. Then Allies bombed German cities, Dresden, with carpet bombings. I think it didn't really influence the outcome of the war. So in Ukraine, then Russia strikes civilian buildings, and they do it for a purpose, because you see how Shahids, they're flying, they're diving down precisely to hit particular buildings, civilian buildings. Then you see how Russia uses sophisticated missiles, hypersonic ones, launching from MiG-31 fighter jets to hit Ukrainian energy infrastructure, power plants. They do it not to harm military, but to create chaos in Ukrainian society, for Ukrainians to riot against the government, or for Ukrainians to push their own government to give up those Donbas territories just like that in attempt to stop this war. But we understand that it's not going to be the stop of the war, because we need to listen what Putin is saying. It seems like American administration is just deaf. They do not understand what Putin really wants. Alright, coming back to those so-called elections. Now there are the talks ongoing about possible referendum that Ukrainians may vote for giving Russia those territories of Donbas. But again, it's not possible according to Ukrainian constitution. No any question of the Ukrainian sovereignty and territory should be discussed on any sort of the referendum. It is written in constitution. And to change the constitution, you need to give up the martial law once again, and majority of the members of parliament should vote for it. Is it possible? No, it's not possible, because to drop the martial law, Ukraine should cancel even its own mobilization, should open borders, and should lift up the other restrictions, and it could be a perfect moment for Russia to intensify its attacks on Ukraine, using some of the reserves. Russia still has some of the reserves that it keeps just for its own protection and for the possible escalation of the war against NATO countries. There are roughly 100,000 soldiers. Potentially Russia may use them. They're like this strategic reserve, but the real reserve are the Russian men, the Russian population, and the possible mobilization in Russia, which might happen the next year. So yes, from legislation perspective, the referendum is not possible. And again, it will face the same challenges as elections of how to physically vote for people. Then there is the war in Ukraine, then their cities are being bombed by Shahids every day, every night. You cannot guarantee security for that. Absolutely. That's why Zelensky calls our allies, United States, first of all, you want elections? Okay, tell Putin to ceasefire 60 days and we'll see what we may do. So honestly, I don't know why Zelensky says about the possible referendum, because it's not legal according to Ukrainian constitution. I think in this way he plays with Donald Trump, showing that he is okay for some prospect of negotiations, and it's just Russia that stops those. Russia wants this war to continue. That is the main reason for Zelensky to play this game with Donald Trump, because after all, Donald Trump, it doesn't have this kind of the leverage on the Ukraine any longer. Then he canceled the military support. For now, just the Pearl program is working with our European partners, and it's just profitable for the United States to sell weapons for Europe. What Zelensky wants, really, I think, is just more pressure on Russia. It is now understandable that Donald Trump will not increase the military support of Ukraine. Everyone already forgot about those Tomahawk missiles. So my opinion, that is just a diplomatic game ongoing. Ukraine and Russia, they want to outplay each other in manipulating Donald Trump and his team. Well, Russia wins so far with this manipulation of Donny. We see it 100%, it's like that. And with the recent sanction exemptions, it is already understandable that some of the companies, they are being excluded by Treasury, Department of Treasury of the United States from the sanction list, those companies that may supply some of the military products to Russia. This is bad. Plus, we see how Donald Trump's administration flirts with Belarus dictator Lukashenko, also lifting the sanctions from his, let's say, airline, Belavia, also other spheres of Belarus. Lukashenko's plane will be, I guess, even delivered to some of the European countries or maybe even to the United States of America. His presidential Boeing 737 for overhaul maintenance. It's outstanding. There was the funny thing actually with Lukashenko that he wanted to get some of the medicine to lose the weight, maybe some sort of the Wegovy, Ozempic, other like Mounjaro, I guess. So he wanted to get the access to the medicine because it seems like of this overweight condition of his body, he has some other medical conditions. So he needs to drop the weight to live longer. And to get those magical pills or magical injections, he is even willing to release some of the political prisoners from Belarus. And definitely he released those. I think 400 with something people he released for the last months. Well, American administration presents that as some sort of the victory of diplomacy, but actually Russia may also have the success via Belarus to some of the military components and to the airplane spare parts to renew them on their sanctioned aircraft fleet, maintaining the airplanes which were stolen from the lease companies. Then the war had started, because those companies, they require Russia to send those airplanes back to Europe, to United Kingdom. Some of those companies are also in the United States and other countries, but Russia refused to do it. Basically, they pirated those airplanes and they maintained those illegally. Somehow they obtained spare parts via allied countries. China is also in this scheme, some of the Central Asian countries, maybe partially Turkey. I'm not sure about Turkey, by the way, I just heard about it. And the sad thing that Georgia is also there. As for Georgia, I know it by 100% because Georgia organized even separate airline just to maintain Russian fleet. Why would Georgia need 767s? It's illogical, and they fly to Russia, so they park their fleet there, they exchange the spare parts, and then they fly back to Georgia asking for original spare parts from Boeing company. Yeah, this world is full of hypocrisy, and our allies who support Ukraine, they continue to purchase some of the Russian goods, Russian components, Russian fossil fuels. We have the aircraft flying here, kind of noisy, have to take some breaks, then they fly. So of course, guys, we'll see what it might happen tomorrow, but I do not honestly expect any sort of the breakthrough. And physically, it's impossible to negotiate this war just between the United States and Russia, just between the United States and Ukraine. It's physically not possible. There should be direct talks between Ukraine and Russia, but this war is the existential one. So I think, it's my perspective, that's my opinion basically, that either Ukraine or Russia will lose in this war. Russia, I mean not country Russia entirely, but the Russian regime and the Russian government. It will finally collapse. Putin is out there not forever, and we see the signs of the weakness of Putin's regime. Yes, it's still capable. The economy will decline eventually, despite China's support and everything of that. No, it's not possible to stop this downfall. Already it's not possible, especially for the Russian military. That's, by the way, the other thing why Russia doesn't want to stop this war, because they changed already of how their economy works. They put it on the war rails, and it's impossible to stop it just like that in a matter of several days or several weeks and even months. No, Russia will struggle. And what to do with those people who will come back to Russia with their AK rifles at least? Russia already saw one of the attempts of the military coup in 2023 with Prigozhin. I guess that Putin doesn't want it to repeat, and he will continue to push in one or other way to make his army busy in Ukraine or wherever. The other thing is how long Putin will be capable to play with Donald Trump. Well, it may continue for quite a while, because Donald Trump, it seems like he is absolutely okay to be played by Russian influencer Vitka, first of all, Kushner, his relatives. He's pretty much okay with that. About this story with Krasnov and whether Trump is a real Russian agent, honestly, I don't think so, but maybe Russia has something on Trump, something like some bombshell that might destroy his reputation or remains of reputation, as with Donald Trump's case, completely. Some Epstein things, because we saw in those emails at least that Putin is mentioned. He blowed Buba, maybe Putin has this photo, something like that, yeah? It was already mentioned, and maybe there is something else out there that Russian intelligence had the access to, and Putin knows about it, Donald Trump knows about it. That's why they have this some sort of the friendship, yeah, good attitude. I like Putin, Putin likes me, he respects me, I respect him, and Putin wants to stop the war in Ukraine, which is absolutely a bullshit. So for Ukraine, I guess those negotiations, they're more dangerous, because there's the pressure mostly on Ukraine, not on Russia, with everything. Even tariffs were applied on Ukraine, those 10%, but Russia stays without any tariffs. Some of the sanctions, yes, but we see how India even started to purchase Russian oil again, almost with the same capacity as before the sanctions. They understand that simply they do not work. I mean, secondary sanctions were not applied on smaller companies, so bigger companies may renew those purchases. So in a couple of months, Russia may obtain some of the extra income for their military. But again, it will not slow down the Russian economy decline in a long-term perspective. And you know, sometimes those pro-Russian speakers, they call themselves neutral speakers, but no, it's not like that. They're actively pro-Russian because they propel pro-Russian narratives. They say that, oh, Ukraine should just give up, you know, give up this Donbas territory, or to stop defending at all, and Russia will occupy Donbas, maybe they will occupy entire Ukraine, but there will be no life losses. So why should Ukraine resist? You know, they were in the same country, Soviet Union, before Russian Empire. Well, people who say that, they do not understand the history of Ukraine, about how Russia humiliated Ukrainians and other nations during Russian Empire, Soviet Union times. There were holodomors, so famine in Ukraine, organized by Russians, by Moscow's elite. So basically, if Ukraine gives up, it will also give up its nation identity, and lots of the life losses will be there as well, because Russians, they'll use Ukrainians as the tool in their next conquering wars, as they use, for example, Chechens. Chechnya lost the war against Russia, so Chechens are now fighting and dying in the war against Ukraine. Elite Ahmad soldiers, they're not dying, those commanders, but still there were multiple of the life losses among ordinary Chechens. Plus, not all of the Chechens are fighting just in Ahmad army. There are multiple of the ethnical Chechens who live in other regions of Russia, not just in Chechnya, and they fight elsewhere in every sort of the battalion, regiment, army of Russia. It's happening like that. And that's the destiny of Ukraine or Ukrainians if they give up to Russia. Also, we know that Russia is autocracy dictatorship, and Ukrainians, they chose the different vector of development back in 2014. They want to be the part of the Western democracies, not autocracy of the East. So we are different people. Ukrainians are not Russians. And that is why there is the confrontation, resistance against this Russian army. And Ukraine already made its choice to defend itself. And luckily, Ukrainian government is not giving up Ukraine to Russia just like that. But those guys like Elon Musk, they absolutely do not understand that there could be even more life losses if Russia occupies Ukraine than for Ukraine to defend itself. Yeah, I understand it sounds kind of strange from my side. After all, I am a coward who left my country. I made my choice, guys, but still I do everything to support Ukraine. And I understand why there is a resistance in Ukraine against Russian occupation. Hope you understand me. And thank you guys for watching those kind of the talkative videos where I just blah 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 for lots of the time. I think it's even could be convenient and you listen to me as the background. Then you do something, you cook, you eat, you do some sort of the job, or you drive your car. I think it's kind of convenient, and I'm available on other platforms, like for example there is my link for Spotify in the video description below. And if you want to make this content possible, please support me on Patreon, also the link below. If you watch me on YouTube, you may join membership, you may also subscribe on Spotify. And I'll go home now, edit this video, and I'm gonna go live every day almost. I'm live on Twitch, Kick, and my other YouTube channel. I want to build this connection with my audience. I really like to have the feedback from you. And if you want to interact with me directly also, please visit my streams where you may join the comments, and I read lots of the comments out there. Well, my friends, that's all I want to say for today. Ciao.